Students are like, oh, I read this 10 million times, or I read over my notes, or I looked over my notes, or things like that. But those aren't super effective in the long term for retaining information. That's a little intro.
O'Neill, what were some of the big things that stood out to you in this
Oh
book?
gosh, okay, so the caveat to the fact that I've read ahead is now I don't remember what was in chapter 1 and what was in chapter 2 and 3. But I believe chapter 1 also includes the story of Matt. Or
Was he the pilot?
Yes, the pilot, the daring pilot, who serves as their first case study. I don't remember the exact details, but he's flying his Cessna and is losing fuel to one of the engines, and that's bad. And so he was able to recount his story to them, so he succeeded at landing his Cessna somehow. And their point was how did he arrive at this complex series of decisions to successfully land a plane the first time this weird thing ever happened to him? And it turns out he had some pretty good pilot training, which was an example of some of the teaching techniques they would like to highlight.
Yeah. And I think with that too, that was when they were talking about the combination of having to have factual knowledge, pieces of knowledge readily available, so that memorization component that you do have to have knowledge, but then you have to be able to apply it in novel situations. So he was the prime example of both of those things were necessary for him to successfully land the plane. He had to know those quick memorized facts, but he also had to know unique and novel ways of applying them together.
And they also got into the details of so what is pilot training like, and from what I recall, basically the gist is you can go and do the initial training in a 2-week period or something, and for the first 5 days you're just sitting there being bombarded with 10 hours a day of lecture that's not particularly helpful for retaining useful information necessarily. But then for the other larger chunk of time you're doing flight simulators nonstop, and so you have to practice all of the things that they just bombarded you with over the first chunk of the course, which was they suppose is a perhaps more effective part of it.
Well, and I thought it was interesting also that with that piece of the simulation is that it's basically a form of a test, and that the test provided some feedback to the trainer or the trainee that, oh, wait a minute, I'm not being successful in this, or it was a way of calibrating his judgment of whether he was succeeding as a pilot or not. And that if we can get away from a test as being this just this big moment of being a fear instigator and almost being an evil thing, as opposed to, no, this is a way of really understanding what you know so that we can gauge what knowledge still needs to be learned and then move on. And so I think with that, they were really promoting this idea of self-quizzing, and not just reading and rereading the text, but are you able, as a learner, are you able to quiz yourself, and are you able to make use of tests to really gauge, oh, wait a minute, I don't know that as well as I should.
Yeah, I think the way I've always put it in context is assessments are really a lot more useful if they're formative. They give some kind of information to the people who are taking them, or some kind of use for that. And an assessment without some kind of formative component to it isn't very productive towards any kind of goal.
Right.
But I guess so the book kind of phrased what the reading and rereading, even then thinking about, let me know if this is kind of the context that they were putting it, but unless you have some kind of formative aspect to that, like you were saying, quizzing yourself as you're reading through something, then it's really easy to not even understand whenever you're reading through something whether you're gaining any information from it.
Great.
And I love jumping off this particular quote, and it's something I've tried to think about a lot, just even for me. It says here, I'm just going to read a few sentences. If rereading is largely ineffective, why do students favor it? One reason may be that they're getting bad study advice, but there's another, subtler reason they're pushing toward this method of review, the phenomenon mentioned earlier. Rising familiarity with a text and fluency in reading it can create an illusion of mastery. So the idea that something looks familiar to students and they think that they know it because it looks familiar. And exactly jumping off of what Joel said, right? Of unless you are actually giving yourself some type of quiz on it, testing whether you know that, it's really, really easy to trick yourself into thinking you know the material just because it's familiar to you. And I know if any of you guys had sort of experienced that in your classes, or I think we do that sometimes too when we're explaining problems on the board, right? And students are following along. They're like, oh yeah, that looks right, that looks good, right? And then we take from that, and they tend to take from that too, that they've somehow, learned that material.
Honestly, one of the things that came to mind during this whole section was like, it kind of reminded me of succeeding at versus not succeeding at quals. Because when I did succeed at them, it was after having done a ton of problems in a mixed up fashion rather than just reading through the book real fast in the 2 days beforehand.
It's very easy to recognize that you understand a solution rather than finding a solution
Yeah.
yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Or even convincing yourself that you understand a solution, but that you don't. Or convincing yourself that you understand something that's completely wrong.
Right.
It's really easy to do.
I remember as an undergrad, it was in Calc 1. I had a great Calc 1 teacher. Anyway, she always had, at the beginning, she had a general lecture format, and I remember following along and being like, I understand this. It was early in the morning, so I didn't want to invest as much energy, perhaps, as I would have later in the day. And at the end of class, the last 15 minutes, she always had us practice problems. And I was always so tempted just to zone out, right? Because I was tired. I had swim practice in the morning before that. I just did not want to think anymore. And I was like, I understood that. I understood everything that she said. But I remember every single time, once I actually got myself to work through the problem, I'd get to a point where I was like, oh, wait, what happened there? I actually don't know how to do that part. Once I actually tried to produce it, and that's really stuck with me.
Did she
a
have you
lot.
talk to each other while doing this, or?
Yes. And that was very, very valuable, but that was a perfect example where I thought I knew it. I recognized and followed everything. I was like, I don't need to practice now. I can do it later on my own. It'll be no problem. But, yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
We're canceling class on Wednesday.
Seriously?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, okay.
Normal calculus is getting canceled. University of Iowa canceled for a day and a half.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from Tuesday at 5 p.m. to Thursday at noon.
Whoa.
And our times on Wednesday morning, our temperatures are comparable to theirs.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
And if we're canceling Wednesday morning, that's half of calculus, so we're just gonna cancel all of it.
Okay.
all right.
Thank you.
Goodness.
I wonder
We
if
should
that
go
applies
home.
to our but I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I don't think.
Lopa.
Loba?
Yeah.
Loba. Okay, sorry, I'm Anna. Yeah, I didn't know if anyone else had sort of experienced something similar that they
Either as a
want to
learner
share.
or
as a learner or as a
an
teacher,
instructor,
right?
yeah.
I've seen both sides of that.
I think that was when I was taking a bunch of physics classes in undergrad, and we used to have this we actually made T-shirts because it was such a funny quote of being like, every time we're in class we're like, yes, this makes perfect sense. Light is both a wave and a particle, and then you'd leave class and you'd be like, wait a minute, no, it's just but yeah, so that was at least kind of it's easy when someone else is up there and doing it to be like, yeah, that's right. And I think I see that also when working with students.
Mm-hmm.
Very much like they're good at nodding along.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you can also see like a lot of frustration of that fact. Like it's not an intentional thing where like no one's trying to zone out or anything. They truly do think that they understand, and whenever
Right.
like
Yeah.
because you see that frustration then whenever they're trying to work on something at home, or whenever they come back and say, I just didn't understand any
Right.
of this. I thought I knew it in class, and now it's going on. And it's because they don't understand what's going on, and that is very frustrating
Right.
because they think that they're doing the right thing and aren't quite sure how to become like an active listener or to really measure whether or not they understand what's going on.
Right at the end of the fall semester, one of my students had attended one of Dr. Butler's calculus review sessions, and he came in, he's like, wow, I understood everything what he was doing. It made so much sense. But now I'm looking at these problems, and I have no idea how to do them. And it just, that idea of being able to follow along, and then when you, like you said, being an active listener, and then but when you actually go and sit down to do it, and the effort that it's taking, just is not as easy. It as much as it's hard sometimes as an instructor to say this to students, I mean, they have to put forth the effort and struggle with it for it to really stick. And I think sometimes the challenge for me as an instructor is also, okay, so how quickly should I step in to alleviate some of that frustration and that stress? Because, I want to help. I want to be quick to step in and say, oh, this is how you do it. And yet knowing that also removes some of the struggle that will ultimately help them to remember it.
And I would think that it'd be a really easy conclusion for students to make that most of the stuff is pretty easy, like as far as like the content, because a teacher goes in and says, okay, this is exactly what's going on, and these are like, say this is a problem, oh, this is how you do this problem, probably because they've spent a little bit of time beforehand saying, okay, this is what the problem is, and this is exactly how you would explain it to be done best.
Mm-hmm.
So then later, whenever they're getting that frustration, if they haven't, run into this kind of problem before, that gets really, again, frustrating for them, because they think, okay, this is how these problems were solved in class. It just kind of flowed together and was really easy. So why is this not working right now? And then just getting stuck up against a wall of saying, okay, it should just come from that. It should just kind of flow, and if it doesn't flow, they don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know how many students you've had that say everything makes sense only in office hours. And they're like, as soon as I walk out of the room, it's like everything just drained again.
And I think what Heather was saying too about the idea of knowing when to help students and how much to let them struggle. And I think that for me, at least, I see both inherently the students and as an instructor, I tend to view the struggle as a very negative thing, right? Like they haven't figured it out yet. What if they don't figure it out and I'm going to help them correctly? What if they don't feel like I'm supposed to be teaching them? Do they really know something? Have they shown that? And I find that tension both from the instructor perspective, right? And then the student perspective of labeling that struggling time as negative time, right? Like this is the time before I figured it out. This isn't a good thing. This is an area to get out of as soon as possible because it isn't comfortable. And that's a hard mindset to struggle against or to learn to embrace or be comfortable with. And I see even with students in the TBL courses or even in 165 and 166 with doing the activities, a lot of things are not readily apparent. Some of them are, but a lot of them aren't, and they intentionally aren't, right? But how to make that not be a negative thing for students or TAs.
I think
Struggle.
we definitely reward getting out of the struggle with, you don't get to turn in your homework and said,
a good point.
well, I spent so many hours working on this and I just didn't come up with anything. It's
Right.
very much a like, okay, I spent 12 hours, I couldn't come up with anything, so, I'm going to get a 0. That was a 12
Right.
hours of wasted time that I could have been doing something else, because it's as if this never happened in my life.
Yes.
I could have spent 0 time on it and also if we got the same result.
Yes. Yes. No, you're exactly right. That is so inherently built into our reward structure for how so many things in academia
Mhm.
are arranged.
I think that's what I was telling someone, that it's almost nice to be taking research credits versus class credits, because you can just say, well, I tried for X amount of hours
Mhm.
and I worked and I tried these things and they didn't work. And yeah, your advisor might be not like excited, but they're like, yeah, you're putting in the effort.
Yes.
Versus like saying like, well, I tried, nothing happened, and now I failed, this
The whole
class,
course,
this
yeah.
homework assignment.
Yeah.
Or,
Yes.
It's also weird because like it's so much it's very maybe not easy. It's easier to measure whether you understand like say a calculus concept or can do this at least calculus skill.
Mhm.
Skills are very easy to measure rather than like say in research it's hard to measure what success is with something like that. Yeah, because you could like spend half a year like making progress towards something without any visible signs of success.
Yeah.
Right?
Was that a little too
Right?
close?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. We're talking about teaching, Joel,
Yeah.
teaching.
but like, so talking about the way that we measure these, like, it is very different. Even just talking about, our reward system in general, it exists because it's so much easier to measure. Can you do these skills than
Mm-hmm.
do you understand these concepts? Because that's nearly impossible to measure. Yeah.
Do you think that it's helpful, both in your experience as a teacher or your experience as a student at whatever stage in your life, to have things like this explicitly communicated to you? Like, to have it explicitly explained to you that the time that you spend struggling is making you stronger. It's helping, even if you don't get the problem, it's helping you understand the problem better. Do you think that that's a helpful thing, or just sort of a talk, but then we have to,
I think it has a lot to do with like the way that the students view what's being said to them, because it can have like if there's a very respectful relationship between the student and teacher, and the student realizes that the teacher is doing whatever they can to be positive towards the students like learning, then saying, oh, these are the like giving advice of these are the kinds of things that will help you learn the best, and they have some reason to believe the teacher and what they're saying, that can be extraordinarily helpful and positive. And on the opposite side, if the students think that the teacher has no investment in what they're learning, it has exactly the opposite effect of saying, oh, this person is saying that I need to struggle, that's just really mean of them, right?
Yes.
Like, why would I listen to what they're saying, and I just need to make sure that I do X, Y, and Z to get it done.
I kind of hope that in, like, at least Calculus 2 on, students are familiar enough with the concept of, like, what the learning math enterprise is even about, that it's a little easier to be upfront with them about, like, okay, you guys sort of know the score. This is going to be difficult again, but here's some stuff that I think works that you should try, and maybe it'll work, and that'll help. I've certainly more often than not lately, I've more recently been trying to be like open about why are we doing things the way that we are doing them in this course. Well, here are the reasons, the actual reasons, and I think you'll agree that they sound pretty good, don't they? And that didn't work quite as well in like Math 10, high school algebra, but like half of the students didn't want to be there at all in any capacity in the first place, and I hope that like Calc 2 some of them do. So I don't know if there's a context independent answer to that. Because, like, I don't know, for example, to zoom out a little bit, like, we're reading Make It Stick, what looks like, I would guess, probably a New York Times bestseller at some point that's, you know, intended for a general audience, not just academics. And so if a Calc 2 or if a whatever math student that we have read this book, would they not find it convincing? Perhaps. So if we convey some of the, you know, actually you should struggle with things because, as you can see, there's this neat explanation of all the good it does you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kate.
I don't know. That what O'Neill just said. It reminded me of this on my high school calc teachers. He had this very kind of like it was a very funny paragraph in his syllabus, being like, if you don't get anything wrong all year, you've learned nothing.
Mm-hmm.
If you get something wrong but you don't ask a question, you've learned nothing. And he was just very much, he's like, I don't care if you get perfects on your homeworks all the time, like you will learn nothing because you just guessed correctly all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just kind of that was at least for the way he just set up his classroom, there was a very safe space to get something wrong initially and not get really felt like, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world. So,
but seeing it more as a tool.
Yeah.
So what were some of the things that you remember from that classroom in terms of how it was initially set up so that you did feel like it was a safe space?
Yeah, so this was especially with homework, it was there was a due date, but it was never turned in. And so it was but he's like, I set aside half the class for when the homework's due, and you ask me problems. You have to tell me what you did, you have to tell me the problem and what you did, and we'll get to where you're stuck. And he's like, and then I'll have someone else maybe jump in, or maybe he would jump in. And so just kind of having that. So it was very much on our own. If we didn't want to do the homework that day, great. We were probably not going to learn anything.
Right.
But just kind of having that, be able to get it wrong and be able to then see a correction of it. I think that was always really helpful to me. But,
Interesting.
But again, it seems like that's especially good for students who have bought into the idea of getting something out of the class.
Yeah, no, this is, But, I have pre-calc as a standalone semester, and that's something I kind of want to build in with. They have their, investigations, worksheets that they're doing. And, okay, work on it as a group. The next day, we'll just have some people do it on the board, and then I can comment on them and maybe make corrections to some of their problems. And then, those questions then have to be right, if I'm taking them. So you would then have to go through the next day and make the corrections to your worksheet. Because
Nice.
that's really I think that was kind of what I always got away from my high school class was the only way you learn anything is if you make a mistake and you learn how to correct it. So just kind of putting that in. It's not always the easiest thing to just I just want homework to be due and I just want to take it and grade it and have it be done. And
But I think that also incorporates other things that are emphasized in this book. And the authors don't emphasize so much the feedback aspect of it, but I suppose in a way a test is a way of giving feedback. So if you're having someone present something on the board, in a way it's just well, here it is.
Yeah.
And it's that formative assessment where they're getting feedback in terms of this is correct or this isn't correct and this is how it could be improved. And then there's also the spacing issue. That's another thing that the authors talked about is, okay, if we just try to cram everything into small sessions or a short times period, if we space that out a little bit more, and then, it's going to be harder maybe to remember what you read last week or that procedure that you tried on the homework. But the more effort that you exert in trying to remember that and maybe regenerate that process again, it's going to stick with you more in the long run. So just even the fact that you're revisiting something again,
And actually,
sounds like you're doing great.
in a couple of chapters, they do start talking about testing as aiding recall, like even without feedback, it still helps
Right.
you recall things.
Right.
And it's better if you get delayed feedback, if you are going to get feedback. And so like having the students work on it on their own and struggle with it and then bring it in the next day, or if they were working on it on Friday and they're bringing it in to talk about it on Monday, then like the claim is that that's helpful in some fashion.
Right.
Did you say they said that delayed feedback is better than immediate feedback?
Yes,
or no
because the argument they make is that immediate feedback is like, if you get used to it, then you start to just take that as part of the exercise rather than actual assessment. Which this is chapter 3 or something. So
Sure.
sorry,
Jumping ahead.
Overachievers.
Yes, and I think one of the examples that they gave in chapter 1, sort of this idea of delay and splitting a process into various parts. So I believe the study was they had students take, I'm trying to remember the exact setup, but I believe it was they had these class of students and they had 3 topics that they were quizzed on throughout the course of the semester, and then they had 1 topic that they had a review session on each time, but they were never quizzed on it. Then for the exam at the end of the semester, the topics that they had been quizzed on, they performed much, much better on. So the idea that this earlier quiz and feedback cycle had helped their retention long term, sort of this delay of coming back to it. But then there was another delay example too. I can't remember exactly what it was. But it was another thing with the Sam. Oh yes. Okay, so the students took did a reading. Oh gosh, sorry, I'm trying to get this as quickly as possible. Speaking of good learning strategies, it was about spacing. It was essentially the 2 groups. One read, they both read, and then, they both read. One had an immediate reread and then took a test. One read, had a reread later after a delay, and then took a test and did better. So this idea that, okay, so we want to hit a concept twice, instead of doing it twice in a row, actually doing it at one period and then waiting a little bit and doing it again later can have a higher impact.
So are you teaching this semester?
Yes.
What are you teaching?
Math 145.
45? So what, are you teaching the whole course or are you
Oh no,
a
I'm just
recitation?
recitation.
Yeah? So what is the structure of the recitations then?
So what I do is I do some problems on the board. So
Mhm.
first I give some questions.
Mm-hmm.
I ask them to try solving those problems.
Mm-hmm.
They can look into their notes with the lecture notes and etc. I give them some time to do it,
Mm-hmm.
and then I ask them to do it in group.
Mm-hmm.
Just whoever has done. I mean, I'm sure like somebody will answer something and the other one would answer something else. Like
Mm-hmm.
so they just cross check with each other, and then wherever they have problem, I discuss it in the board,
Mhm.
and then I have the quiz.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like they're getting some opportunities to maybe struggle on some problems and
Oh yeah,
And
I,
what-
I let them to have. I want them to struggle in
Good.
the questions, and
Yeah.
then if they have problem, I can always answer.
do you have some students who seem like they always want, can you help me? And they want you right there all the time or?
No, I mean I just had 2 classes. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's still pretty early in the semester. So.
So they have this idea of the penny memory test,
was gonna ask about
Yeah,
that.
what is
The
that?
penny.
Yeah.
That I was-
So it's actually a
Horrible.
sort of
Horrible.
unique thing. So essentially it
Can we play it?
is testing
Yes.
the idea of all these things. Yeah, you could look up if you want. Testing the idea of when you see all these things, just because they're passing in front of your eyes, are you retaining any information, right? So they have all these pictures of faces of a penny, but they're all slightly different. So maybe the head's pointing another way, or the text is different on the dot, or the things are in the wrong place, all except for one. And you're supposed to try to figure out which is the correct penny.
I didn't
yes.
succeed at the penny test.
Do you have that?
I don't have
you
it, but we
Google
could
it,
pull
you
it up
search
on
it,
our
it just comes
computer
up
really
instantly.
quickly.
I like
But
the example of the fire extinguisher too, where it's
yes.
just like,
I knew where mine was.
I knew where mine, I,
Aha.
yeah, I know where mine is.
I'm checking
Yeah,
if
so
there's
that's not
secretly one
very
in here.
There's one right
Large,
outside
but you
the
can
store
see like right there.
by the drinking fountain.
Like, ooh, can you pick out the correct one?
And honestly, I did this like 3 days ago or whatever, and I would not be able to do it again.
No, these were made in Detroit.
Oh man. Yeah. Do we want to look at which one it?
I think it is D.
I'm going with J.
J.
I
No, the date's on the bottom.
I think it's.
What's the difference between F and D?
Um,
Oh, there's an extra text there.
Oh, I don't like that extra text, or maybe I do. I don't know. Okay, let's see which one it is. The answer is at the end of the story. Where's the?
Second last paragraph.
Line A,
The correct choice is drawing A.
Okay. Yeah. There's one.
At least we had it pointing the right way.
I would have said like all of the above.
So what do we think? Like, what does that have to do with us teaching our students things? Oh, smarty
Wow.
pants.
Oh, I say.
No, that
for
was
the
just on
recording, we
ground.
just found a
Yeah.
penny on the floor. Wow, Joel did.
Mhm. The date's not right. Wait, what are those dates?
It was 84.
This is 89? Okay.
They've changed the style of the year, so
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'd be curious about how people rationalize something like that memory test, because it's a different type of memory, right? This is a very passive memory.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, I think
that's
that's key,
Yeah,
right?
it's very different than.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, are there any places where we're using that passive memory in math, or our students are using that passive memory? That really, I mean, we could see like, oh yeah, that looks familiar. That's
Well,
a penny, right?
Definitely when they're adding fractions.
Mhm. Where they're not thinking about like what's going on there, but rather this
Yeah,
is something
There's
that's
a plus in the
been done before,
denominator. That's 2 fractions.
Yeah. But like another way, like so, whenever I looked at that, I didn't just think, oh, what's familiar, but I was thinking through like,
Mhm.
okay, what are the different words, and really, this was something I was thinking about earlier. You were talking about summarizing what was going on there in different types of memory. Like rote memory is the right word for like memory
Mhm.
without context.
Yes.
Right? It's just, and is there? I was actually wondering, is there any such thing as actual like pure rote memory? For instance, whenever I was looking at this, I was also thinking about like making connections to
Mhm.
other types of things. For instance, I know it says 1 cent, but it says 1 cent on the back side, and I know that it's got a date, but I can think about other coins, and all the other coins have a date in the bottom right hand side, and so like in that situation, like even though this seems like it would be a purely like rote memory, do you recognize what's going on there? there's still contextual ideas there to
Right.
draw back from. I don't know if that.
No, I totally agree.
But, and I think, I don't have this thought fully processed, but I mean, I think there's also something to be said about, the connections that we make, and the deeper we understand something, I think there are more connections than to other pieces within our
For sure.
cognition, this whole idea of fractions, and, can someone look at a rational function and think fraction versus that's in a completely different branch, abstracted from arithmetic of fractions.
It was really
you know?
funny working on finishing up the project today in Calc 2 TBL. We had a partial fraction decomposition thing. It was relatively straightforward as they go, and people were just like, wait, I've got 1 over 1 minus u squared times the other fraction 1 over 1 plus u squared. Like, what am I allowed to do here? Can I combine these arbitrarily? And like, you're overthinking it.
Right.
I think abstractions in that kind of sense are hard for a lot of students in general.
Yeah.
Whereas like if you just say, okay, this is what it is. Here's a basic example where I replace that u with a 2 and the u plus 1 with a 3. Now do
Mhm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can
Yeah.
do that and then kind of abstract it.
Yeah.
But that maybe that just goes back to, right? That's a situation where instead of approaching this problem as, rote memory, these are steps that you take to be able to add fractions, understanding, oh, I can do it with these, and abstract that idea to something else. Again, that's just completely circumventing the idea of just memorization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The idea is when we're teaching a new concept too, how do we help students develop those generalizations, right?
Sure.
Those bigger frameworks that they can then apply to a different or broader context, right?
Mhm.
And that's a huge question of how do students, like how can we help students with that?
One thing that I'm always impressed by though is that, so myself, I have a horrible time remembering absolutely anything. But there are definitely students who just work in completely different ways. For instance, if they need to solve a problem, they can just remember the steps and it works, and they do it efficiently. And so they don't have as like deep maybe as a conceptual understanding of something, but they're able to perform perform it in a different way to a equal level. Which then that I feel like that's maybe an important thing to remember as when having conversations like this, that students do work in completely different ways, and so like sometimes students can play to their strengths in ways that are completely contrary to what we would expect would work for students overall.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just I know some students are very good. They see a problem once and they can do every problem that's like very similar to it. But I did have one student, and it was he was just like this. And then if it was something new, like it was just hard for him to like put pieces together of like you need to do something like this problem and something like this problem. So that was definitely kind of like a new challenge or a different challenge of trying to help a student kind of really grapple with something new for the first time and try to think about what different pieces do I have that I can put together. Where I think there's still an opportunity for us to kind of think like, oh yeah, you can't just memorize everything
For sure.
for students.
Mhm.
Even though some of them probably do work different ways than us.
Yeah.
We have to push ourselves to find those types of problems.
Well, yeah, we're at 3:00. Thank you for joining us. We'll meet again in 2 weeks on February 11th and discuss chapters 2 and 3 if you get them read. If you don't get them read, those of us who have can summarize and continue to build on the conversation.
Thank you. Feel free to take another treat on your way out. I don't want to take them home.
Two,
I will just
sorry,
eat them
we'll
all.
take another.